Is trust but verify a management style that gets results? Does it get results over the long term? What about unions? Find out more on 10 Tenets of Leadership. This episode of 10 Tenets of Leadership. I'm Andy McCaskey from SGR News, introducing the host of the show, Larry Pendergrass.
So we have a couple of guests here, and we're going to be discussing the first tenet of the 10 Tenets of Leadership that we've discussed in previous videos. I'd like to introduce two people to you. First, Scott Elliott is the founder of Tenets LLC, which is a management consulting firm. He has been in high-tech industry management for over 30 years, including many, many years with Hewlett-Packard. So welcome, Scott Elliott.
Hello, Larry. Thank you, and it's very nice to be with you today.
Great. And I'd also like to introduce to you Jack Cowper. Jack has most recently been the VP of Operations for Tektronix, a Danaher corporation, a company. And previous to that, he was the president and COO of Rohde & Schwartz America. So welcome to you also, Jack.
It's great to be here.
So today we're going to talk about the first tenet of leadership, which is respecting people and trusting them to do a good job. I'll introduce this tenet, and then I'd really love to hear the opinions of these two gentlemen and their experiences in industry related here. We'll start with respect and start with trust with people. Make that the primary starting point, that you will get the best out of your people. And your job as a leader is to create an environment where they will rise to the occasion, and that it's in people's nature to try to do the best they possibly can and do good work for you. So let me first start with Scott. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences along this line? And by the way, I should mention to our audience, we don't always expect to agree on this video, and that's one of the reasons we bring this to you, to get different opinions.
Yeah, I've had a long career with a number of different companies, large and small, and some of them were very trusting in their employees. The famous one, of course, is Hewlett-Packard. I worked there for 25 years. And but I've also worked for some other large and small companies where there wasn't very much trust between the employees and management. And in my experience, the companies where there's a lot of trust really were not only much nicer to work in, morale was much higher, but people really produced a lot more, I think. You know, for instance, one large aerospace company I worked in early in my career, if you wanted to get a part to build a circuit board or something like that, you had to go to a storehouse and fill a form out in triplicate, and it would take an hour, and then you bring it back and it wouldn't work and so forth. And it really wasted a lot of time and make you frustrated. Whereas other companies, the trusting ones, they had an open lab stock. You could go in there anytime you wanted and pull any kind of a component and bring it back and build something. And even if you're going to take it home for a hobby, they didn't care because they figured you'd learn something. So the result was that in these companies, so much more got done, and it got done so much faster. So I'm a great believer in this tenet number one.
That's great. Jack, how about you?
Yeah, so I think respect and trust are very different. So my on the respect side, I think that a lot of people have to understand that respecting the employee is also benefiting the company. And so when you look at that, a couple of my examples are when you create a culture of collaboration, you're not only getting the best ideas out on the table for the company, but you're also saying to your folks that are involved in the process, I respect your input. I think also as a management style, which I definitely adhere to, management by walking around, you're not only getting a feel for what's going on inside the company at the ground level, which is very important for a leader. You're also saying to the employee, I respect your contribution. And so I think that I think people have to understand that respect concept not only benefits the people that work for the company, but it benefits the organization as a whole. The opposite would be command and control environments. And command and control says, I don't respect your input, I'm just going to tell you what to do. Nobody wants to work in that environment. And I think that those environments create mediocrity. They create a level of staff that simply is probably not the best you can get. And organizations want the best you can get. So I think on the respect side, that's really critical. And on the trust side, same thing. You trust. People want to be trusted. The whole thing about do what you say you're going to do. I think that's really critical. But at the same time, you have to hold people accountable. And I think there's that balance that leadership has to make sure that respect and trust are taken in a concept where you absolutely foster it. You have to foster it to get the best people, but at the same time, understand that it's a benefit to the organization.
Yeah, good. You know, although these ideas predate McGregor's statements in the 60s, he did crystallize this nicely in what was described as Theory X and Theory Y of management. We talked about this in a previous episode, so I believe our viewers probably know what this means, but in short, what we've just described here is what McGregor would call Theory X, Theory Y, where Theory X tends to be very, very different. So Scott, I'm kind of curious, the first company that you were talking about, the more aerospace defense-oriented company, sounded like it had aspects of this Theory X style of management. Where did you see it worked, and where have you seen it not work?
Well, I mean, certainly a Theory X kind of company or command and control structure can work in a situation where decisions have to be made fast and they have to be made without question. And you know, that's certainly why any military uses that kind of a structure. And it has its place in companies too. You know, particularly there's a lot of famous startup companies that started from a command and control, almost dictatorial kind of visionary founder. And those can really work for quite a long time to get a company up, to get some innovative, world-changing kinds of products out. But I don't think they're very sustainable for the long term. You know, they might be sustainable for one or two kinds of products, but then after that, you have this lack of respect and you have this lack of trust that causes people to spend a lot of their time protecting their behind, basically, and protecting themselves, rather doing things in their own interest rather than doing things in the company's interest. So yes, there is a place for command and control, particularly when there are fast decisions that have to be made. But in the long term, I think the Theory Y works a lot better for sustainable profits and growth.
Well, some very famous people, like you're describing, who have built great companies based on, I should say, led by this command and control dictatorial kind of approach. I'm sorry, Theory X kind of approach. And some of them very famous. There's a great biography written by one person that I'm sure we all know. That kind of individual might say that I drive people to become better than they are, even though I'm belligerent, arrogant, condescending, disrespectful. I know that I'm going to push the people that shouldn't be in my company out. What do you think about that, Jack?
There's a place for that. I 100% agree with Scott when he says that when quick decisions have to be made. I think Theory X works when there's a crisis. I think when there's an economic downturn like we saw in 2009, you need a command and control environment to right the ship for that situation. And I agree that that's why the military, and one of the things, by the way, just to offshoot, it's very frustrating when you see analogies being made about sports and about war to business. It's completely different. And you know, in football, for example, decisions have to be made in 60 minutes. Business is years. And so it's not the same. Having said that, I think the Theory X leader has to have a quality that is so tremendously incredible that will work for the long term. So the biography you mentioned that was written, that person had an incredible imagination, an incredible vision. And you can go theory X on that if that individual is somebody that you can just align and you just want to absorb what that person can offer. And I think that that's where it works. I think those individuals are few and far between. And I think as a result, it can't work for the long term, what Scott was saying, in most situations. But I think in very few situations, with a very visionary individual that can contribute the way that that person contributed, yeah, that can work. And people will maybe thrive in that environment because they're learning so much from that person.
So we've talked quite a bit about how the antithesis of this tenet might apply in certain cases. When can you take this tenet too far, respecting people and trusting them? Is it possible that people can apply this in a way that becomes destructive for their company? What do you think about that, Scott?
Yeah, I think that can happen as well, and I've seen cases of that. I've worked in companies like that, and I've also consulted with companies like that, where the respect and trust turned into a management style of consensus so much that everybody wanted to respect each other and trust each other so much that nobody wanted to make a decision. They wanted to make sure that everybody else has the same point of view before they make any decision at all. You know.
At least one of the companies I think that we're talking about, I remember them calling themselves terminally nice. At least they recognized it.
Yeah, exactly right. And so what happens is you can get to a situation where anybody can veto a decision, but nobody can make it. You know, and this can cause very long delays in product development and basically any business process.
Jack, have you seen situations that are similar to that?
The company I was with formerly, globally, was in that situation, but what the organization I managed in North America was definitely on the teetering on that, but didn't go that far. Having said that, I think one of the biggest risks in taking it too far is that you just trust an individual so much, or you respect an individual so much, or you respect the culture of respect and trust so much that you don't take action when there's non-performance. That you know there's an acceptance of non-performance, and I think that's where you get in trouble, because you're not optimizing your organization. You're not doing any favors to the person that is underperforming. And so I think that I've definitely seen that where you get too lenient and too accepting of individuals that aren't taking it to the best they can do it. And that I think is one of the biggest risks.
So, you know, there's another topic I'd like to bring in here, which has to do with the presence of unions. There are two things that are interesting to me. Maybe you folks could help me with. The first is the presence of unions in an environment where many managers believe in the theories of trust and respecting others as giving them greater productivity and bringing the best out of their people. Many managers are trying to practice this, and yet we see the presence of unions throughout this country, at least. What are your thoughts about why unions still exist in this kind of situation? Jack, can you start us off here?
So, you know, if you look way back into the days of Ford and the first Model T, he was the only one producing cars. And from that perspective, I think you probably do need a union, because you're in a situation where there is no competition. Where else are these employees going to go? And so you get into a situation where I think that the employees, particularly the production workers, are in a situation where that Type X manager can abuse the situation. In the U.S., and I want to kind of confine it to the U.S., I think that nowadays, with the global competition that's going on, and with situations where, while it's not easy, especially in this economy, for people to move around, I don't think unions are necessarily necessary anymore. I think we've gotten to a situation where if you do not treat those employees with respect, with trust, and give them a fair deal, so to speak, you're not going to be competitive in the marketplace. Having said that, switch to China nowadays, where they have nets around factories so that people can't commit suicide.
Right.
That's ridiculous. And I guarantee you, a union, and I don't know much about the Chinese labor laws, but a union is probably necessary there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the situation. Is as we advance, the unions become unnecessary. There are still segments, I think, in our sectors of our economy that need the union, but as a whole, particularly in a commercial company, I'm not sure it's really necessary.
Comments about that, Scott? What do you think?
I'm not sure I completely agree with Jack. I mean, the three of us here, the four of us actually have always worked in an industry, electronics, where most of the people are highly educated and in demand, and so we've never had to, or we haven't for a long time had to work in a sort of unionized situation. But I see other places, like for instance, my wife works in healthcare, and there it's a lot different situation. I think in some cases unions are really needed there. But going back to how can you operate in an environment of trust and respect when you're working with unions? That is an area where it's really tough. I've certainly seen a lot of companies that don't do well at all with that aspect of management. When they have a union around, they're really antagonistic. They're fighting all the time, and it's kind of forces a command and control structure to make it work at all. But on the other hand, there certainly are cases where unions, especially companies that have come in to our country from foreign countries and wanted to do production here and have had to work from the beginning with unions,
Mm-hmm.
and they've set up a trusting relationship with them. They said, look, we want to hire your people long term, and we want people to work, but you got to work with us, and we want to be able to fire people that aren't doing their job and things like that. And they actually work with the union, and the union supports them. And in those cases, it can work, and it has worked. But you just don't hear about them in the news, right?
Right, right.
The news reports, the news loves to report the bad stuff.
So, Scott, is this a kind of a chicken and egg thing? You mentioned healthcare as an example. Are the unions needed because the management is not practicing that trust and respect, or is it the other way around, that trust and respect isn't given because of the presence of unions?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. It is a chicken and egg thing that, management doesn't really respect people. For instance, they can get healthcare workers everywhere. There's an abundance of them, and so their attitude is, well, I'm just going to throw you out and get somebody cheaper that'll work harder. And on the other hand, the workers don't necessarily trust the management either. In the first place, in that industry, the people who really do the work, the doctors and the nurses and so forth, really aren't very interested in business, so they don't really know much about business.
I'm not a healthcare professional, so I certainly don't know anything about that. but I would say that, what are the basics that people need, right? I mean, they want a healthy work environment, they want the respect and trust from their employer, and they want good benefits. And I think if you're getting that without a union, then there's no issues. If, for example, in healthcare, they need that, which is a booming and will continue to be a booming industry because we all need that basic function. If unionization is required there, and otherwise they wouldn't get the benefits that I just mentioned, then yeah, great. But I would be shocked if that was the case. And I just think that that a union is there to provide fairness for the employee. And I just can't imagine that without a union, it wouldn't be fair. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And so, again, I think healthcare is a big deal, especially today, and especially with Obamacare and all that's going on. Going back to the respect and trust tenet, I think you would find that without the union. But the chicken and egg that you mentioned, it was unionized because it had to be at one time, and now it's unionized still. And so I wonder if you took that unionization away, if maybe it wouldn't even get better, if the benefits wouldn't get better for the folks that are in that industry.
So Jack, have you ever had a situation where you had placed maybe too much trust in someone in the workplace, and what happened, and what did you learn from that?
Absolutely. I've definitely been in a situation where I trusted an individual too much. It comes down to what they tell you, and you believe it for a certain period of time, and you act on it, and you continue to make decisions based on that input. And then you come to find that that input was completely false. And it could be because he made a mistake, he or she made a mistake, or it could be because he was simply lying. And there are two different situations. Individual makes a mistake, fine, fix it, move on. Individual purposely deceives you. That's an issue. And I've been deceived for certainly for too long. When you find it out, when you discover it, you certainly have to take action, and that individual, has to be reprimanded and probably worse, let go. But yeah, I've definitely been there, and I think my learning from that was that they always say this trust but verify. Well, yeah, I get that. The whole verify thing kind of dictates that you don't trust. So it's one of the, I've always hated that expression. But you certainly have to trust and continue to listen to that person and look for signs.
So there's a term that I've heard called management by exception. I tend to use, I think, a management style that's very similar to that. I'm curious if this is like your experiences, Scott. Management by exception, meaning give somebody basically 100% of that trust, try to set up the right environment, and what you're really doing is managing by out of bounds kinds of conditions. And it does help leverage you in terms of your use of time, not too much oversight and things like that, and really allows you to have, if you've got good control measures, the right kind of reactivity. What kind of experience have you had with similar things, Scott? And have you had a situation maybe where you've put too much trust in somebody and found the limits of this particular tenet?
Yeah, well, the only time I've really run into that is when I've been managing remote teams where I wasn't able to keep a pulse on the whole group. Most of the time when I managed co-located teams or teams that I was at least visiting often, I've never taken input from just one person and had to kind of trust one person. The managing by walking around thing that Jack talked about is what I did a lot to talk to a lot of people, find out what's going on, because even if you trust somebody and even if they're honest, they may have a very different perception than others of what's going on in reality. So you really need a lot of different inputs to figure out what's going on there. The toughest part is just, for instance, I was managing a group in India, in Delhi, India, right? And I couldn't get there, but maybe once a year for a few days. So I really did have to take the word and the trust of the person I had over there managing that group. And that did lead to some problems from time to time, and to the point where I held actually kind of remote level skipping meetings where I would bring in teams of people under this person and talk to them about issues and things like that, and that helped somewhat. But generally, if you can stay in touch with whole groups, not just with the person leading them, then it can work. And it's not usually a case of somebody's being dishonest or somebody's being telling falsehoods on purpose. It's usually they just have a different perception of what's going on.
Jack, any comments for our audience about how you might, those people that are interested in implementing this tenet, how they might do that, and what cautions to bring to mind?
Yeah, I think, back to the whole respect and trust, I think if you have an environment like that, leveraging off what Scott just mentioned, you're going to have people, when something goes wrong, people will step up and gladly give you that feedback. I think that's why that tenet is so important, because, at the end of the day, you need those inputs to make decisions. And if you're making decisions in a bubble and you don't allow people to speak up and you don't have that, you haven't created that culture, then you're in big trouble, because you're going to be blind to so many things in the organization. And so I think for that reason alone, if you can create respect and trust in the culture that that fosters collaboration, you're going to be so much better off than a situation which is opposite of that, and you're just with blinders going forward, and you're not getting the inputs that you need to make decisions.
Great. Any closing thoughts from you, Scott?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, so many of the businesses and projects these days are global, and it's one thing to build a trusting, theory-wide kind of organization in the American culture, but now people are having to do it with partners in China and Eastern Europe and all kinds of places in the world. And there, it's even more challenging to build a trusting and trusting relationship and respectful relationship. Because some of these cultures don't have that kind of theory-wide culture in the first place. So you have to bring those people together and really work together on a team and really build a culture yourself of that trust. But it can really work as well.
Yeah, that's a very good reminder to think about the cultural impact throughout the world. There's some great books for people to read out there on power distance that's different in different cultures and the expectations that workers have about what their management would be like. I'd like to thank both of our guests, Jack Cowper and Scott Elliott. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, I think it's my pleasure, Larry, and thanks to Andy as well.
Larry, thanks very much for bringing together the episode here today where we learned a lot about trust and respect on the first tenets of leadership from your series. Next week, I understand we're going to be talking about management by objective. Thanks also to Scott and Jack for joining us, and thanks to you for joining us on 10 Tenets of Leadership.